what they did, which is to go for zero COVID. And they are now leading very normal lives in New Zealand, albeit with a draconian border policy, where if you go in, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks and you have to test negative several times, and then you're allowed back into the big bad world or big good world of New Zealand. Why have we never done that? Given that we're now doing all this, which is nearly a year after the virus exploded into the world, why have we decided that now it's a good idea, but it wasn't a good idea when the virus first came along?
Well, when the first virus came, we actually put people into Arrow Park who were travelling back from China at that time.
How many people?
To have that
How many people, do you know?
But Piers, I don't know the answer to that, but Piers...
It was a couple of hundred, wasn't it? I mean, let's be honest, we've only ever quarantined a couple of hundred people, haven't we?
I would say that we've had a number of restrictions that we've had on international travel. You know, certainly in the run-up to Christmas, we were saying to people, please only consider essential travel. Unconscious that people have chosen to do different things during that time. But in terms of the introduction of locator forms, in terms of now we have pre-testing for people who want to come into this country, in terms of the 10-day isolation period has been in place for some time, as well as the test to release. And the Prime Minister is clear that we will continue to consider further measures that may be deemed necessary. As I say, we've picked up
but if as you say,
more variants,
right,
which are more challenging.
If, as you say, we've done all the right things, can you explain why we currently have the worst death rate in the world? And can you explain why we have one of the highest death tolls in the world? If we did everything right, how have we ended up here?
Well, as I say, we've been learning throughout this process, working with scientific advisors on trying to take the appropriate policies. There'll be a variety of reasons why people unfortunately have died due to this. Some of that will be recognising the age of our population. Some of that will be recognising the obesity of our population. But we've been learning throughout how we can improve the different ways of trying to help people during this. You know, at the same time, I'm very conscious of the economic impact it's had, particularly on young people. That's why we are trying to do what we can with education. It's why we've created Kickstart. It's why we're trying to make it
but just to clarify, given you now
involved.
Listen, I applaud you for giving us some reasons, because
that's the first time we've heard a government minister on a couple of explanations.
Right, none of your colleagues last week could give us any. So you've given us two now: the ageing population and obesity. So are you saying that the reason for us having the worst death rate in the world is because of the public? They're too old and they're too fat.
I think that's a very insulting thing that you've just said.
You just said it.
I'm conscious that there's a variety of factors which will have led to people sadly being ill during this time, sadly that translating into deaths. I'm conscious that this is a very serious impact. Our own Prime Minister was in hospital in intensive care himself last April. I'm conscious that we are wanting to make sure we have a wraparound support.
Sorry, what did you find insulting?
We have done
out of interest, what did you find insulting? You said two reasons for the fact we have the worst.
I also need to point out that you started this interview late. Unfortunately, I have to go to other broadcasters as well. And I wish that we'd had more time when we were.
Well, you can come back anytime, but we haven't seen
I appreciate that.
I haven't interviewed you since May, so you can come back anytime. It was you that boycotted the programme, right? So please don't play the "you haven't given me enough time" card, because we gave you 8 months and you didn't turn up. Let me ask you this.
Yeah, but just due to start at 8:15.
I understand it.
I'm really excited about the opportunity to kickstart for young people.
I understand.
But I'm sorry, Piers, I'm going to have to go to another broadcaster.
I just wanted you to clarify, given you said I was insulted.
Piers, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go.
You're going to go. You're not going to explain why you think I was the one insulted.
You've already had 20 minutes of my time. I appreciate your time as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Miss Coffey. Okay.
It's interesting because
she throws out...
She gives two very interesting reasons.
The 2 reasons why we have the worst death rate in the world, apparently, are we have an ageing population, so we're too old.
And we have an obesity
problem, we're too fat. And yet when I said so... It's the public's fault then, is it? We're too fat and nothing to do with the government. I was the one insulting.
Just like to point out, after Prime Minister Boris Johnson emerged from hospital, having recovered from coronavirus, he himself had a press conference at which he said he had an underlying issue and said literally, I was too fat. So he grasped that particular issue early on.
Incredible she thinks I'm the insulting one, but the only reasons she can give as a government minister for why we have the worst death rate in the world are the age of our population and the fact we're too fat.
Dr.
And
Hillary, is that the case? do you
I'm the
think?
insulting one, because nothing the government's done, despite the fact Matt Hancock in that clip we played told us we were well prepared for any kind of this kind of outbreak, and it turned out we weren't. But nothing the government has done is the problem.
No.
It's to do with our age and our weight.
But Dr. Hillary,
Well, the US have a much greater obesity rate than we do. Ours is bad compared to the rest of Europe, it's true, and age is a risk factor. But of course, there were many, many other reasons. We had porous borders, we didn't have an effective test and trace, we didn't have a stringent enough lockdown. There are many reasons. PPE wasn't sufficient either, we weren't prepared. So it's multifactorial for sure.
Let me tell you, there's a reason why we have the worst death rate in the world. Because our government has been woefully incompetent in handling this crisis. And for Thérèse Coffey to come on here and say that we're the insulting ones, we are. Because I challenged her premise that the only reason we have the worst death rate in the world, apparently, that she could articulate is because we're too old and too fat. That were her words, not mine.
yeah,
That was the reason. Nothing to do with their incompetence.
she's the government minister who pointed it out. Anyway, Lorraine is here at 9.